Let me tell you what living in your car actually is, before I tell you anything else. Not the version that exists at a comfortable distance from the sentence. The version from inside it. Because the distance between knowing a thing and living inside it is the distance between a weather report and standing in the rain. And I have stood in the rain, and I want you to understand what the rain actually was, before I tell you what came after it. Living in your car is a daily negotiation with the minimum. Not a single condition. Not a fixed state. A series of decisions that begin before you are fully awake, and that continue until you are no longer awake, and that in the hours between those 2 points require a quality of sustained practical attention that people who have not lived this way do not understand is required. Because from the outside, a man sleeping in a car appears to be doing the least effortful thing available. And from the inside, a man sleeping in a car is managing a situation with all the cognitive resources he has, because the situation requires all of them. Where do I park tonight? That is the first decision, and it is the decision that everything else depends on, because the parking is the foundation, and the foundation is what you build the rest of the night on. The church parking lot on Magnolia that allows overnight stays without a knock on the window. The Walmart on the east side that is open 24 hours, and whose overnight parking is an unspoken accommodation to people who need it, and whose security guards have made, individually, the decision to extend an unofficial permission that the corporation has not officially extended. The rest stop on the 5 that posts an 8-hour limit, and that I use on the nights when the calculations have not resolved, and I need the legal boundary more than I need the familiar location. Where do I shower? This is the second decision, and it is the decision that sits between me and the version of this situation that I cannot come back from. The Planet Fitness on Baseline, whose $11 monthly membership is the most important $11 I spend each month. Not hyperbole. The shower is the thing that keeps the situation manageable, in the specific way that one thing can keep a situation manageable when everything else is not manageable. I plan my days around the shower the way I used to plan them around meetings, and I keep the membership current with the same priority I give to the medications, because both of them are keeping something functional that stops being functional if the payment lapses. Where do I eat in the way that a body needs to eat? Not the gas station minimum, the specific collection of the cheapest available calories that is technically eating, but that is not the feeding that a body at 63 requires. 63-year-old bodies have requirements. They have the blood pressure that needs managing, and the knee that has been managed since the surgery in 2019, and the cholesterol that my doctor had been discussing with me since I was 58, and that I had been addressing with the medication that I was still somehow maintaining, because the prescription was the one financial commitment I had protected above everything, except the Planet Fitness membership and the car. The car. I need to tell you about the car before I tell you anything else, because the car was everything. Not everything in the romantic sense of everything. Everything in the literal sense that it was the only thing I had between me and the version of this that produced an outcome I was not going to allow. A 2009 Toyota Camry with 183,000 miles that I had bought in 2014, when the Camry had 112,000 miles, and that I had maintained with the specific vigilance of a man who understood that the car was the floor, and the floor was not something you let deteriorate. Oil changes on schedule. Tires rotated. The serpentine belt replaced in August, before I was in the car, because I had been told in July it was showing wear, and showing wear on a serpentine belt when you are living in the car is not a situation you defer to the point of the belt's own decision about when it goes. My mechanic was a man named Gilbert, who ran a small shop on a street in Sacramento that I had been going to since 2016, and who told me the truth because he had been telling me the truth for 7 years and had decided that telling me the truth was the correct relationship to have with a customer he respected. He told me in October, that the transmission was beginning to develop a hesitation that he had seen before, and that the hesitation had a timeline he could not specify precisely, but that was finite, and that the finite end of the timeline was a decision I was going to need to make, that he could not make easier by being vague about when it was coming. I was in that car from March to August, 5 months, in the parking lots of Sacramento in the spring and the summer, in the specific geography of a city that does not get cold in the way that cold becomes dangerous, and that permits a kind of vehicle residency that a northern city would not permit, because the northern city's winters would not permit it. I was not cold. I want to say that because cold is the element that makes the version of this in the northern cities an emergency rather than a condition, and I was not in that version. What I was in was the Sacramento version, which was warm, and which therefore permitted the situation to be sustained, without the urgency that cold produces, and which in some ways was worse, because sustainability permitted the situation to become established, and established situations develop the weight of the permanent. I had been established for 5 months. Let me tell you who I was before the 5 months, because the 5 months did not arrive from nowhere, and the nowhere they did not arrive from is the context that explains everything. My name is Joe. I am 66 now, which means I was 63 when March started, and 63 when August ended the way it ended. I spent 29 years as a licensed plumber in Sacramento, California, residential and commercial. The specific physical work of people who work with water, and with the systems that move water through buildings, and that remove it after it has done what water does in buildings, which is the work that no one thinks about until the thinking about it becomes unavoidable and urgent, at which point the thinking about it is also calling a plumber at 11 on a Thursday night and discovering that the Thursday night plumber charges rates that make the regular rates seem theoretical. 29 years. I started at 34 after a decade of other things that did not work out, and that I am not going to detail, because the detailing of them would take longer than the story has room for, and because they are the decade that produced a man who understood the value of skilled trade work and who applied himself to the licensing and the learning with. The focused intensity of someone who had tried other things and who had finally found the thing that matched the way his hands worked, and the way his mind worked, and the way his body was built, which was for the physical precision of work that required both technical knowledge and the physical capability to apply it in the specific, confined, and awkward spaces that plumbing requires. I was good at it. I want to say that without false modesty, because false modesty about your work is its own kind of dishonesty. And I have been trying to be honest in this account, and the honesty includes the honest accounting of what I was good at. I was a good plumber. My work held. In 29 years, I did not have a callback for something I had done wrong, that I was not willing to own and fix, because doing work wrong and not going back was not in the vocabulary of how I understood the job. I was married to a woman named Cheryl from 1998 to 2021, 23 years. I want to tell you about Cheryl with the honesty she deserves, which is the honesty of saying that she was a good woman and a patient woman, and that the patience ran out in the specific way that patience runs out when it has been sustaining something that the thing itself was not sustaining, and when the person providing the patience finally looks at the arithmetic and understands that the arithmetic does not balance and has not balanced for longer than the looking away could justify. I was not a bad husband. I want to say that not as a defense but as a precision. I was not a bad husband in the ways that the phrase bad husband most commonly means, which are the ways that involve cruelty or deception, or the specific failures that leave marks. I was a bad husband in the ways that are quieter and harder to name, and that are therefore sometimes more durable than the louder failures, because the quieter ones do not produce the crisis that forces the naming. I was absent in the way that men who are working are absent. Not physically, I was in the house, absent in the way of someone whose attention is always distributed between the room they are in, and the jobs lined up, and the estimate that needs to be done, and the supply run for tomorrow, and the customer who called at 6 about the permit, and who needed a callback. I was absent in the way of a man who had been giving his full attention to the work for 23 years, because the work was what he was good at, and what he was good at was where he put his attention, and what was left for Cheryl was the attention that remained after the work had taken what told me most things, which was directly, and without the softening that direct things sometimes receive when the person saying them is worried about how the saying will land. She was not worried about how the saying would land, because she had said versions of it before, in the careful incremental way that people say things when they are hoping the saying will produce a change. And the saying had not produced a change, and the not producing a change was itself information about the man she had said it to, and about whether the change was available. She said, "Joe, I have been here the whole time, and you have been somewhere else the whole time, and I am done waiting for you to arrive." I said, "I'm here. I'm right here." She said, "Your body is here. You have been somewhere else for 15 years. I wanted to argue with this, and I could not argue with this, because the arguing would have required me to produce evidence of the presence that she was saying was absent, and when I went to produce the evidence, I found that what I had was evidence of function rather than presence. I had paid the bills. I had been in the house. I had done the things a husband was supposed to do in the register of things that could be done from the somewhere else she was describing. I had not been present in the way she meant presence, which was the way that presence actually means it, which is the full attention of one person directed at another person, because the other person is what the attention is for. She left in April of 2021. She went to her sister's in Fresno, and she was right to go, and I knew she was right to go, and the knowing did not make the going easier to be inside, but it made the responding to it cleaner, because I could not argue with something I knew was right. The house sold in October. The equity paid off the second mortgage, and produced a remaining amount that I put in an account, and that I told myself was the foundation of the next chapter, and that was the foundation of the next chapter, until the next chapter produced the expenses that foundations get consumed by when the income supporting. The foundation is the income of a self-employed plumber whose body has been doing the work of a plumber for 29 years, and whose body had been sending invoices about those 29 years since he was 55, and whose body in September of 2022 sent an invoice that was final rather than advisory. The back, specifically the lumbar, specifically the L4, L5 disc, that had been the subject of the advisory invoices for several years, and that in September decided the advisory period was over. I was under a house doing a drain replacement when the advisory period ended, and the ending of the advisory period produced the specific experience of a man whose lower back has decided to resolve a long-standing disagreement in the most direct way available to a lower back, which is to make the disagreement impossible to continue deferring. I could not work for 4 months. The workers' compensation covered the medical treatment and a portion of the lost income, and produced a recovery that the doctor described as good in the context of the injury, and that I experienced as the recovery of a man who was going to be able to work again, but who was not going to be able to work in the way he had been working, because the way he had been working was the way that produced the September invoice, and the September invoice had been the final one in the advisory series, and the back's position on another decade of the same work was clear. I went back to work in January of 2023. Lighter work. The jobs that did not require the positions that the L4, L5 disc had taken a position on. The work that available for a licensed plumber who could not do the full range of the licensed plumber's work was less work than the full range, and the less work was less income than the full range, and the less income against the rent of the apartment I had moved into after the house. And that I had chosen without fully running the numbers. because choosing without fully running the numbers was something grief does to the part of your thinking that is supposed to run numbers, which is to say, grief had made the number running feel like something that could wait, and the waiting had allowed me to commit to a rent that the reduced income did not support. I ran the numbers in November of 2023. I ran them in the specific way that men run numbers when they have been avoiding the running of them, and when the avoiding has produced a situation that the numbers, once run, make clear was coming for longer than the avoiding permitted them to see. The rent was $2,100. The income on the lighter workload was averaging $3,300. After the rent and the car and the insurance and the medications and the groceries and the phone, the remainder was approximately -$40.